India, how many archaeological sites get that kind of interest from the public.
What resonated with me is that how people looked at it, how emotional this topic was, how interesting it was to so many people.
What is it about the excavations at Keeledi, the findings at Keeledi, that has added so much pride, so much of Tamil pride, and why is it contested?
These potsherds were suggesting, did people purchase these pots and write their names? So was that a sign of literacy in these places? Did it look like Harappa? Did it look like Mohenjo-daro? Are we looking at a similar thing here?
Because the Keeledi findings, they corroborate with the Sangam texts.
Romans and the Tamils hung out a lot back in the day.
Hello and welcome back to the Indian Express. Today, we will be speaking about a small village in Tamil Nadu that has been making a lot of headlines for all that it has dug out in the last 10 years or a little more than 10 years. This is the Keeladi Excavations, which is often regarded as one of the most contested archaeological excavations in the last 1 decade in India. We have spoken about Keeledi in the past on Indian Express as well, but today we will be speaking about it in a lot more detail because of this remarkable little book. It's called The Dig, Keeledi and the Politics of India's Past, written by Sowmiya Ashok. This book is basically a 360-degree view of the Keeledi excavation and everything that connects it to larger archaeological excavations and history writing in India. To discuss it with me, I have with me Sowmiya Ashok, the author of the book. Sowmiya is a journalist. She has in fact been a journalist with Indian Express till about 5 years back, and she has been covering environment, culture, heritage, archaeology, and so much more. Welcome back to Indian Express, Sowmiya.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. And thanks for calling my book a small book. I got a feedback that it should have been 30 pages shorter by somebody on the internet.
No, I think it's perfectly placed.
Thank you.
All right. So before we begin about The Dig, tell me, how does it feel to be back in your old office?
It's really lovely. It's really lovely to be back, to see everyone. It's been a few years actually since I've been back to Delhi. And it's always this stretch to come back to a newsroom that I really loved, actually. This is my favorite newsroom of all the places I've worked in. And I'm not just saying that because I'm sitting here. But a lot of my reporting skills, a lot of my editing skills on how to be sort of critical about my own work came from the training here. So it's been thrilling to come back and also meet a lot of my editors from the past.
We are just as thrilled to have you here. Okay, so tell me that, when did you think that this little site in Tamil Nadu is so big, is going to be much bigger than any other archaeological excavation site, big enough for you to write an entire book on it?
The first time I came to know of Keeledi was actually 2015. I was still working in Delhi back then, and that was when the discovery had happened, and I'd seen some of these reports in the newspaper. So I was sitting in Delhi reading about this site that was happening, or these excavations happening in Tamil Nadu. But it was much later, during the lockdown, that I was approached to do a long-form piece, and they asked me, is there something interesting that you wanted to write about? And I pitched this story because I felt like what I read had been very exciting, but then it got sort of, really political. The controversy that happened around it was very political, and I wanted to understand where does it stand in 2020. So that's when I first started looking into it, and it sort of, grabbed me in a way that I didn't imagine it would, and I never thought it would become a book. But at that stage, it was me heading to Madurai to have a look at the site, and at a time when everything was still, we were reeling from a summer of lockdowns and things were still quiet. But it was my first sort of boots on the ground at Keeledi under these wonderful coconut groves that you've also seen from your visit. And it was like, oh, this is where all of this had happened. And much later, as I started, wondering if this could become something, I started thinking of it as a book. And what resonated with me is that how people looked at it, how emotional this topic was, how interesting it was to so many people, how busloads of folks were coming to have a look. And I think that was the exciting part, where I thought, just as I was fangirling, so was the rest of Tamil Nadu. And there was something about the site that was worth sort of, clarifying, only because it had been marred in so much back and forth and narratives that it felt like a good idea to sit down and say exactly what happened and what are these excavations. So that's where I guess somewhere along the line I made it into a book.
Actually, it is very interesting that an archaeological site, which is considered to be fairly, obscure and dry in India, how many archaeological sites get that kind of interest from the public. That in Keeladi, in fact, even when I visited, I was quite astounded by the kind of tourist attraction it had. And then you have a museum also now beside it. You have roads that have come up connecting it to other parts of Tamil Nadu. Can you tell me a little bit about this transformation from 2015 to we are now in 26 and Keeladi is still in the news. It keeps
Absolutely.
coming up.
Yeah.
How have you seen this site transition in the last 10 years?
So, like I said, I only went there in 2020, so it was still 5 years after the excavations, the initial sort of discovery by the Archaeological Survey of India. Today, if you go back, actually, there's a wonderful open-air museum. So, both you and I haven't seen it yet because I've been traveling, promoting this book, but I'm really looking forward to going home to see it. But what the ASI team initially excavated is now open for the public to see. The Tamil Nadu government has acquired that land and sort of put like glass panes on all of this, and it's a lovely walkway around it for you to look at what was discovered in the early years. So that's how far we've come in terms of also allowing access to something like this and for it to be really a beautiful experience. And I think the same is with the museum that came up, I think, in early 2023, if I'm right. And what had happened is when I first went there, it was really just a couple of villages and people talking about the site that was largely under these coconut groves. So when an excavation is finished, most of the time it's packed up again with sand and a tarp so that you can go back for it to be whatever it was. And in this case, it was a coconut grove. Suddenly to see it all opened up like a little beautiful parcel for you to come and look at is a really exciting, situation. And here now we have little shops that have come up with memorabilia or like snacks. The museum is really a wonderful space that a lot of people go and relax, even drink buttermilk and have like sundal, as we say in Tamil. So it's a place to gather as well. And one of the most interesting sort of feedback I got from one of them when I was hanging around is this woman comes up to me and she's like, for us to see a museum like this, we would have had to go to Delhi or Bombay, and now we have something very locally, that too in Madurai in Tamil Nadu. So it has really transformed into a tourist spot, and they even won an award for the maximum number of visitors in one of these past years. Yeah.
Wonderful. Did you also feel that the village by itself has changed, not just the site, because of these excavations? Has there been any changes?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a taxi driver made this point to me that a lot of this land around these areas were also taken up by real estate agents. So we're going into a place where all of us are sort of building bigger, right? And this particular village has also been preserved well because of archaeology. So it's a really nice feedback of, this has now become a heritage site that needs to be preserved and cannot be eaten up by, a big high-rise or whatever. But the village itself has sort of acquired a place in Tamil Nadu. It's become popular. I remember meeting a woman who got married and came to this village and to live with her husband and her husband's family. Wow. And when she first said she's coming to Keeledi, or in Tamil we say Keeledi, people were like, where is that? That sounds really far and weird and whatever. And she was telling me how in the last few years, people call her with such pride that, hey, you live there? Wow, that's so exciting. And her name is Mani Megalai, which is a Sangam name. So it was a really lovely story. I was just waiting because it was too hot one afternoon and I was just chilling with her in her shop, and she was telling me this, that just in the years that I have been married and moved here, this village has transformed and become more popular.
That's quite wonderful. So, in very simple terms, what is it about the excavations at Keeledi, the findings at Keeledi, that has added so much pride, so much of Tamil pride, and why is it contested?
So one of the things that we didn't have access to before, at least in this way, is being able to see what an archaeological site is, right? You and I might have read about this in our history textbooks. We would have seen like a picture of Mohenjo-daro, the Great Bath. That was very exciting to me as a child. To be able to see a similar sort of look and feel of it close to home was probably the first aspect that, triggered this sort of enthusiasm. And that people were like, oh, there's just this, we are living in a social media world. hey, let's go and see what this is about. Let's take pictures of it. Let's share it with cousins and friends. Let's make reels from the place. They are saying there was a nagaram. In Tamil, we say nagaram, a township. We should go check it out. Perhaps this is where our ancestors came from. It's really close to my village. I'm sure there's a belonging to this, right? So it came from a place of ownership where, hey, this is probably my ancestors. And from there, it went into, as more and more excavations were being made and more discoveries were being made. For instance, potsherds were unearthed with names of people. And these kinds of ring wells and furnaces that came out of there were suggesting, was this a textile unit back in the day? These potsherds were suggesting, did people purchase these pots and write their names? So was that a sign of literacy in these places? These names are names that pop up in Sangam literature. So is this a connection with the ancient poetry that we didn't have tangible proof of so far? So all of these little things, as more and more discoveries were made, were building into, wow, this is something that is really exciting for Tamil Nadu or for the Tamil region. And that sort of propelled a lot more people to come in to see the site. Now, what is contested is multiple things. I think the initial controversy in 2017 was around some comparisons that were made about the site. Did it look like Harappa? Did it look like Mohenjo-daro? Are we looking at a similar thing here? And that definitely, I think when you say Harappa or Mohenjo-daro in India, it's a very exciting comparison. So it immediately propelled the site to a much bigger status in terms of comparison, right? And so that formed a lot of excitement, and the fact that this was termed as a Sangam era site, the fact that this was termed as a site that allowed you proof of how life was when these poems were written. And these poems are these ancient literature that we have, which is roughly dated between 300 BC to 300 CE. And so when you have you have these poems and you've never really had tangible proof, here was the site offering you, hey, so this is something that was discovered and this has resonance in poetry. And when you went to the museum, you would have seen that every artifact has a little board next to it which tells you, this is the poem, this is the reference, this is where people were wearing cotton, and cotton is still grown there, and so on. So it was immediately like seen as a nice complement to these literary texts. And that initial controversy was around the transfer of the lead archaeologist, Dr. Amarnath Ramakrishna, who was transferred to Assam. And that particular move by the central government was seen as a immediate sort of, affront to this unearthing of what is essentially a Tamil culture, a Tamil settlement, or Tamil civilization even. So that really was the trigger. Over the years, in the last few years, if you've seen it in the news, it's about the excavation report. So Dr. Amarnath Ramakrishna has come up with a very, very detailed excavation report, and he submitted to the ASI early 2023, and it has just been under review for the last 3 years. Yeah. So the controversy has exactly been 3 years now. So the controversy around can that report be taken seriously? There has been some pushback to say that he needs to validate the dates that he's given, which is as far back as 8th century BCE. And off late, there was one more internal inquiry on his report to make more suggestions about how the report is not meeting with the standards. So there seems to be a very specific sort of scrutiny of only this excavation report, when there are so many excavation reports in the ASI that has not been scrutinized in the same way.
Yeah, that's exactly what is very peculiar, very interesting about this site. But going back a little bit, see, in Tamil Nadu also there have been excavations in the past. Arikamedu, I believe, Adrija Roychowdhhury, if I'm pronouncing these correctly. These were also important excavations. Why is it that Mr. Amarnath Ramakrishna, the chief archaeologist, he chose Keeledi?
Right.
Why was this particular site chosen, and what was he trying to do differently here from what was already done in the past?
So one of the things I've understood through reporting is it's easy to identify burial sites, because burial sites are easy to spot. They're generally a little away from where people live. And you can see, even today, you have the crematorium or a cremation ground a little away from people live, or more cordoned off, right? So there's a lot more work done in identifying burials in the past. And I think when he set out on his expedition, his team had this one research question that they wanted to find a place where people lived. because a living habitation site where people lived would offer more like of interesting plethora of things into the past. So that was the conversation they set out with. And one of the other things which I found really interesting is, just like I guess we as journalists do better if we report in our mother tongues, right? I would be more effective reporting in Tamil Nadu because I can speak Tamil, and I would probably, I mean, I made it work here for 7 years somehow with my broken Hindi, but it's still not, you're getting the nuances a bit wrong still, right? Whereas archaeologists also have this thing of going back to their home states because they understand the culture, they can speak the language. So his team sort of set out to identify habitation sites along the Vaigai River, which is a major river that cuts through the ancient city of Madurai. And Madurai is a place that has intrigued a lot of archaeologists historically because it has been referred to in the Sangam poetry. It's been referred to as this major hub of like commerce in the past. There's been a lot of hills around Madurai which has like old Tamil inscriptions etched on it. So there's always this curiosity about what is Madurai. So it was also linked to that the choice of why Keeledi over something else was because they wanted to actually look at Madurai. And Madurai is so full of habitation, right? Inhabited by scores of people today, that it's hard to get anyone to leave and be like, can I just look under your house? It's not possible. And not just that, because we're going into this era of modern living, we've already built high rises, which means imagine a JCB machine just like taking away a whole bunch of artifacts that could have been examined, right? So it's a bit late, I guess, or it's not possible to like dig. So what they thought is, let's do this really scientific sort of process of looking at both sides of the Vaigai River and identifying things that might pop up. And in that process, they found Keeladi under a coconut grove, which is only about 12 kilometers from Madurai. So I think that was the choice as to why. And then, like you said, Arikameda was very much, I write about it in the book, it was initially sort of dug up in the early 40s by Mortimer Wheeler. And if you go there today, you see a more like modern structure of a seminary from, I think, the 17th century, if I'm right. But you don't really see this kind of brick structures and layout that you see in Keeladi. Adichanallur is a burial site. So if you go today, you'll see wonderful like earthenware pots into which people were buried and kept on this like mound, and it's a really stunning site. One should visit for sure. But I think the clues as to what he was looking for was more in a habitation, and that can give you more clues as to the trade networks back then. You know, there was Romans and the Tamils hung out a lot back in the day, exchanging things. And there's this great anecdote I heard that in the Senate, they were like, can we tell the Roman ladies to stop acquiring pearls because it's draining our treasury, right? So there was a lot of conversation and exchanges, and a lot of the beads and things that have come out of Keeladi, including this carnelian intaglio, which is my favorite artifact from there, shows some kind of influence of Rome. So this also offered a larger sort of insight into trade networks, insight into conversations from the past. So,
you also mentioned that, you know, the initial reason why it was contested was because of the comparisons being made by Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And we know that when it comes to archaeology in India, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro they have a different kind of status. Why is it that Keeladi is even compared to Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, even at an incipient stage when it was being compared? And why did that turn into such a controversial area of?
So why was it compared is a harder question, because it's a personal choice that an archaeologist makes to make that comparison. But with Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, I think, like I said, we have this sort of like a conjuring up of the early Harappans. They were the first urbanists in the subcontinent, and they were the ones who like taught us how to build big, right? So there is a fascination to who were the Harappans, and because their script is difficult to decipher still, we have like allowed ourselves to get really excited about what those possibilities are. And of all the work that's done there, they've been extremely enterprising as people. The other thing is, all of us have some version of, when you look at our DNA and if genetic tests that people have, DNA tests that people have done, there's a bit of the Harappan marker in all of us. So it's a huge influence on the South Asian population, that people have migrated. The Harappans did sort of migrate into different parts of the country, and we all carry a little bit of Harappans in us, right? And I think with Keeledi, because of this comparison, and I keep switching Keeledi, but hey, they make, once these comparisons were made, it was not odd also because it gives a certain sanctity that we are linked to the sort of the first urbanists. But also there is this theory that when the decline of the Harappan civilization took place, where did they go is multiple theories have been offered, and we've read that they moved towards the Gangetic plains, and that's where the second urbanization happened. But there's equally like a pretty solid theory to suggest that they moved to other parts of the country, not just to one place and then they came south. But I think the story is so exciting because there's this theory that perhaps they went south and perhaps they hung out in those parts of the country, and that sort of is what the when you look at some of the scholarship is that did the Harappans speak a Proto-Dravidian language? So can we claim them over you, right? So I think that sort of fits in modern India. That fits into this fight that we're currently having over who is the oldest, who came first, and so on.
Exactly. And I do believe that the Tamil Nadu government is also pretty, enamored by the Harappan civilization of late, with the statue of John Marshall coming up in Chennai, if I'm not wrong. Right. So there's that kind of politics also happening around Harappan civilization, while Keeledi is also...
I mean, they organized a wonderful, I think, 3-day conference commemorating like 100 years of the discovery, right? Yes. Which I think was a solid platform for many people to come and offer insights into their research on the Harappan civilization. And it was very well put together. I attended all 3 days of the event, and just a plethora of folks who were brought in, not just from Tamil Nadu, but from abroad. And not just a pro sort of... how do you say, like, oh, we can only subscribe to one theory on what this is. There was space for critical analysis of some of these theories. So I thought that was quite interesting because I don't necessarily think the ASI commemorated it immediately, but they did have a event some months later.
Yes. True. There's also this idea that because the Keeledi findings, they corroborate with the Sangam texts. That is also something that has fed into the excitement over this site. And I remember a conversation with Professor Nayanjot Lahiri in which she had mentioned this, that even in the north, whenever you have a site that is talking about the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which people are very emotional about, there is that kind of an excitement. And we know some of the biggest examples of such sites like Ayodhya and what's happening in Varanasi as well. In your research, what did you think while reporting, talking to people, like how influential were the Sangam texts in giving that kind of validation to the findings in Keeledi?
It was really, really important, and I write about it quite jokingly in the book because I was somebody accompanied me around this makeshift sort of museum in the early days. In 2020, there was a makeshift museum of all the Keeledi artifacts. And this incredible archaeologist from the Tamil Nadu State Department of Archaeology, his name is Mr. Asai Thambi. He spent the whole time while he was describing these to me, quoting Sangam literature. And I was just like vigorously nodding my head to pretend I understood, because Sangam literature is difficult if you're not a scholar, you haven't studied it like he had, because he's an epigraphist by training and then an archaeologist. So I spent a lot of time like trying to fit into the Sangam world where people were just throwing poetry at me, and I was like, I'm going to go look that up. Which one was that again? So there was this very casual sort of wonderful exchange of poetry as the discussions around Keeledi was taking place. And also I write that Keeledi turned into a Sangam laboratory, right? People were feeding in verses and out came like tangible proof. So there was these, whether that was beads or whether that was like even references to horses from Arabia, or whether that was references to kattidam, which is like the way brick structures are. So the poems have incredible descriptions of Madurai back in the day, how it had ramparts and forts and so on. So in a sense, if you look historically at the way archaeological research, and I read about this, that they were using these poems as a first step. It was like what we would do as journalists to get a first understanding of something, we would Google it, right? Yeah. So this felt like a Google map version of it, right? Where do I go look for it? Oh, this poem is saying this region, so let me go there. And I mention another incredible Tamil archaeologist, Professor Rajan, in the book. He says how based on one line in the poetry which mentioned beads, I went to Kodumanal, which is in western Tamil Nadu, and he dug out hundreds of beads from that site. It's one of his most famous excavations. So with Keeledi, there was this excitement also because they found so many parallels to the poetry. There's another question on like how quickly can we interpret this, and that's for the archaeological community to deal with. But as an observer or chronicler of this, I felt this was an interesting comparison.
You know, your chapter on Tamil pride, there's one chapter that you have, which I thought was, you know, I really love that chapter. Also, because you begin very strategically with the Jallikattu. Why did you decide to, you know, when you are speaking about archaeological excavations in Keeladi, why did you choose to begin with Jallikattu over here? And what are the comparisons you were making?
So it wasn't really, I didn't really sit down and think this was the way I wanted to tell it. I was interested in going to understand what had triggered this kind of passion and emotion when it came to the ban that had happened, right? Unfortunately, when the protest was taking place, I was not in a position to go report. I was recovering from surgery, so I was watching these protests on TV, and this was early 2017. And I was like, this is really interesting, like I should file this away for understanding this later. And the more I spent time in Madurai, in that region, in southern Tamil Nadu, this sort of relationship with land, this relationship with your pastoral sort of, with your bulls, with your fields, with your community was so much different to what I had understood of it being an urban Chennai person, right? So to me that was interesting because these speeches that I had heard online, they were so full of passion saying, hey, central government, like you're messing with the wrong folks, we are Tamil and you know, we won't back down. And to me, the similar thing was seen with the Keeladi protest. Every time, even when Dr. Amarnath Ramakrishna was transferred, there was a lot of protest and angry messages, and people took to Facebook, people took to the streets. Again, last year when his excavation report, there was pushback, there was protest on the ground in Madurai and in Chennai. So to me, there was a parallel on both of these were happening in the Madurai region. Jallikattu more or less happens in that Alanganallur. I went to the Alanganallur one, but a lot of it is around this Virudhunagar, other areas around Madurai, and so was Keeladi happening. So geographically, it felt like you were basically attacking the heart of what is a cultural capital of Tamil Nadu, and you're not going to hear the end of it because we are angry, right? Like that was the thing. So to me, I went actually for more out of academic curiosity as to what is this. I wrote a piece for Scroll. I remember when I filed the story, and I just found it very amusing. One of the things that I found in this book is that there are a lot of men everywhere. So Jallikattu was, as I mentioned, is full of like this, the thronging crowds are largely men. And of course I found some wonderful people to speak to. But it was also that, what does this signify for the larger sort of community? And I met a bunch of cousins there who said, these are bulls that we grew up with and we love them, and there's a different sort of feel to it. So how I feel about it now, it doesn't matter, but it was the sort of the capturing of that emotion as to something that I was unaware as to what makes you feel so strongly about an issue is what I was trying to capture in that chapter.
I think it is really the journalistic eye that could have written something so fresh about an archaeological site and connecting it with so many other things. I'll end this conversation with asking you what has been your biggest takeaway in terms of how archaeology is practiced in India and how it is perceived by Indians.
Sure. I think before that, I'd like to make a point as to why did I write this, and you just very sweetly said about the journalistic eye. I think we're in a position in India where we also badmouth journalism a lot. And that is truly my first love. If you ask me how do I identify myself, I'll say I'm a journalist first, and then I'll say a woman, and then Tamil, or in some order, maybe Tamil first, and then journalist, and then woman. But it's very important to me that I'm in a position where I can write interesting stories. And to me, the only way the story could have been told is to be neutral about it, because I don't think it's useful to be, getting carried away with a topic that really does require a critical eye on it, because it is about our past. It's how we get defined. So to me, that was the reason I did this, is also to say, journalism is not terrible, you know, like you can trust us, we do a good job and we can tell you a good story. And also that the past or these conversations, and I know there's so much, you know, back and forth between North and South India, there's so much misunderstanding, there's issues with how we think of each other. It also doesn't have to be this sad, right? You can joke about some of this stuff. And I think the reason I started with the prologue of the Chess Olympiad is these North and South Indians just going nuts on the internet, and the internet is a wonderful space to get to know how we're feeling about each other. So to me, that from my understanding of how the landscape of archaeology or history is, and there is again that division as to ideology and how we think about our past, and there is no conversation happening anymore between these groups. So in a sense, perhaps this was, you know, my contribution to be like, can we have a conversation at least? Is it possible to have a conversation starter? But the thing I felt a lot of people were lamenting to me who are old school archaeologists is that these spaces for debate and discussion about a site, including Keeledi, which I hope happens, that you have something that is released and then people talk about it amicably about, you know, what can we say about this? That is shrinking. Those spaces are shrinking. So I wouldn't want to make a sweeping statement of this is the state of archaeology. I feel like I have spoken to enough people who make that point in the book. But the idea that is it not possible that we are living in this like really wonderful country that we can actually make it work and get along with each other. So, and at the heart of it is just a good story that you can read and feel like you learned something. Because I learned a lot. Like for me, this was, I am trying to learn things, so you just come with me on this adventure and I'll teach you what, not teach you, sorry, I will tell you what I am learning, right? So that's what the objective was.
Wonderful, and congratulations once again. This has indeed been a very good read, very insightful read, and the conversation with you, the insights you've brought in today, that too has, you know, really enriched us. I'm sure all of you would like to read more about Keeledi, so definitely pick up the dig. To listen to more such conversations on archaeology, on history, heritage, culture, do subscribe to the Indian Express.